Parents, colleagues, alumni, and especially the class of 2016. Augustine College, an adventure in learning. Let me begin with a framework. On the 12th of August of this year, I wrote the following email to Miss Amanda Pfeffer, who at the time was the moderator of the daily noon-hour program on the CBC called Ontario Today. I'd had a previous exchange with her. Here's my email. Dear Miss Pfeffer, I appreciate the dexterity with which you carry out your role in moderating the program. But today, I found your phrasing of the question, well, let us say, somewhat jarring. Quote, who do you blame for the mess in the Senate? Quite a question and theme recently. Now, the question was asked over and over. Who do you blame for the mess in the Senate? My dear, should it not have been, whom do you blame? It is a direct object of a transitive verb. I know. There goes Professor Bloedow again. Keep up the good work. If so, I'll keep listening. The next day, that is exactly a month from today, I received the following reply. Thank you for this, Professor Bloedow. I think we should send our questions for an edit before we send them to our audience. Cheers, Amanda. Well, the next day I wrote to her again. Dear Miss Pfeffer, a splendid idea. But I think I can do you one better, namely by actually suggesting a question for your program. For instance, do you use the word absolutely? And if so, why? Now, there does not appear to be a word more characteristic of the current Canadian vocabulary. Virtually everyone uses it across the entire social spectrum, from the most educated university professor to the least educated individual. One hears it about 100 times on the CBC a day, and everywhere else. In 1987, the American philosopher and academic Alan Bloom published his bestseller book under the title The Closing of the American Mind. The first sentence of the actual text of this book, that is after the foreword and the introduction, runs somewhat as follows. Any professor can expect that virtually every young person entering an American university today comes with the belief that truth is relative. In short, virtually no one today with a university education or even a high school education or less believes in absolutes or absolute truth. Why then does virtually every other Canadian today use the word absolutely? Now, there is a question for your program one day. Do you use the word absolutely? And if so, why? That should make for a really worthwhile philosophical, sociological discussion. As an aside, my email going on, When discussing the sophists in ancient Greek culture with my students at the University of Ottawa, I used to put the following proposition to them. Do you believe that truth is relative? If so, try the following. Arrange a meeting with the dean, and when there, ask him, do you believe that truth is relative? His answer will almost certainly be yes. Well, in that case, ask him, do you mind if I cheat on an exam? You know what the answer will be, but then all you need to say is, but did you not just tell me that you believe that truth is relative? In that case, if it seems good to me to cheat on an exam, how could it be wrong to cheat? So, why does virtually every other Canadian and non-Canadian today so pervasively use the word absolutely? And so, a good question for your program. Do you use the word absolutely? And if so, why? Cheers, Edmund Bloedow. I'm still waiting for a response to my offer. And while I wait, let me draw your attention to some words by John C. Lennox, the eminent professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford, in his book just published this year under the title Against the Flow, the inspiration of Daniel in an age of relativism. Quote, relativization of the absolute is endemic in the pick and mix postmodern society of our own century, particularly in the West. Whether you believe in Jesus, Buddha, the Beatles, crystals, Mother Earth, or anything else that takes your interest, all are held to be on the same footing. All have equal validity for the relativist. Indeed, many people are convinced that this is by far the safest position to adopt. Absolutes are dangerous, they say, and especially religious absolutes. Sam Harris, one of today's militant new atheists, writes in his book, The End of Faith, Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason, published in 2005, quote, we have been slow to recognize the degree to which religious faith perpetuates man's humanity to man. End of quote. Lennox goes on. His suggested solution is radical. Harris. Words like God and Allah must go the way of Apollo and Baal, or they will unmake our world. End of Harris. Lennox. He does not only wish to relativize them, he wishes to relegate them to the museum of the history of outmoded and discarded ideas. He regards atheism as the only defensible position. End of quote. This, my friends, is the cultural framework in which we find ourselves today. The second part of my address I call Augustine College. Meanwhile, you have arrived at Augustine College. That is a good thing. Here we invite you to an adventure in learning. For what we have to offer is really remarkable within the framework of the culture reflected in my little exchange with the CBC. Indeed, here at Augustine College, we, for one thing, believe in absolutes, in absolute truth. Of course, this ought to be self-evident, but in this era, it is rather revolutionary. Now, we have very good grounds for our position, namely statements by and about Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It is probably safe to say that today there's no individual better known in the world than Jesus Christ, no matter what people's connection or non-connection to him might be. For us, he is the very center around which our college revolves. Let me here cite a statement he made that has a direct bearing on the episode with which I began above. It is recorded by one of those individuals who knew him best, namely the Apostle John. And here's the statement. Jesus said to him, that is to Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. John 14:6. Now, if ever there was an absolute statement. Earlier, John wrote about Jesus as follows. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. There was the true light which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. John 1:4-9. In the ancient world in which these words were expressed and written, and no less so in the context of today, they were and are dynamically revolutionary. And it is within this, the ancient and intervening and current culture, that you will be learning here at Augustine. And it will be an adventure. You will encounter many old ideas, and also many new ideas. You will be invited to assess them. Did I say assess? But let us not get ahead of ourselves. On the 14th of August of this year, Alexander Nazarian wrote an interesting article in Newsweek under the title, quote, "You're 100% wrong about critical thinking," end of quote. He noted that despite all the current controversy over education, quote, all agree on a single criticism of public schooling in the United States. Not enough critical thinking is being taught in our classrooms, end of quote. He continues, in pure lexical terms, critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Translated into pedagogy, it's teaching students to be intellectual mavericks, cognitive cowboys who poke bullet holes into every received concept, who duel with Aristotle and Dickinson, who are never complacent, submissive, or even quiet. They brim with what Walt Whitman called original energy, end of quote. But Nazarian disagrees and proceeds by admitting, with tongue-in-cheek, that he does not actually know what critical thinking is. He supposes, facetiously, that its opposite is uncritical thinking, which he projects is, quote, the unquestioning reception and retention of facts, which I hate to tell you is supremely important in mastering any field of knowledge. Uncritical thinking is pretty unsexy, often requiring rote memorization, deadening repetition, and not infrequently humility before intellect greater than your own. Only someone who has uncritically mastered the intricacies of Shakespeare's verse, the social subtext of Elizabethan society, and the historical background of Hamlet is going to have any original or even interesting thoughts about the play. Everything else is just uninformed opinion lacking intellectual valence. End of quote. In support, he cites Diane Ravitch, education historian who wrote in the Boston Globe in 2009, quote, "We have ignored what matters most. We have neglected to teach them that one cannot think critically without quite a lot of knowledge to think about. Thinking critically involves comparing, contrasting, and synthesizing what one has learned. And a great deal of knowledge is necessary before one can begin to reflect on its meaning and look for alternative explanations." End of quote. Well, here at Augustine College, you will find yourselves predominantly in the Ravitch mold. That is, learning to acquire knowledge. Nonetheless, we shall also at least try to wet your feet in the basics of critical thinking. The combination of these, I must tell you, is a tall order. But at the same time, it should constitute one of the most exciting chapters in your life, an exceptional opportunity, one that will not come again. While we shall guide you in this exciting adventure, there will be specific requirements on your part. Indeed, to get the most out of the next 8 months, at least 5 things will be required of you in learning. There are more, but I shall just take 5, and here I shall list them and offer a few remarks. 1, commitment. In light of the time you're setting aside, in light of the money involved, and in light of the very nature of the enterprise, you will need to commit wholeheartedly to this adventure. Now, the word commitment comes from the Latin committo, and literally, most literally, it means to send with, but also to connect, unite, combine. And many words, of course, are also used in a figurative sense. And in a figurative sense, committo can also mean to begin. The Roman poet Horace wrote, "Qui cirpit dimidium facti habet incipe." He who has begun has already half finished the project. So get going. A good beginning at the outset will be a crucial factor in your adventure. 2, diligence. From the Latin word diligentia, or the verb diligo, which means to choose out, to prize, love, esteem highly. And diligentia in Latin, English means carefulness, attentiveness, accuracy. The Oxford English Dictionary offers, as an explanation of diligent, constant in application, assiduous, industrious. You will need lots of this, but it will pay dividends. 3, self-discipline. Disciplina, another Latin word meaning learning. You will now, perhaps for the first time, in large part be on your own. You will therefore have to do some self-learning. That is chiefly how to go about learning. 4, organizing your time. Closely related to self-discipline will be organizing your time. You will discover time slipping by very rapidly. You will have a substantial program. Hence, how you organize your time will have a major bearing on the outcome of your 8 months at Augustine. 5, what I call collegiality. One of the central components of these 8 months will be living together and interconnecting with your fellow students. This could and should be one of the most positive aspects of this adventure. Learning together, interacting with one another, praying together, stimulating each other, encouraging each other. All these and more can and should combine to make this an experience truly memorable, the memory of which will last for a lifetime. And the last part of my address I call looking ahead. What do you expect to get out of these 8 months at Augustine College? What should you expect? It is worth thinking about this already as you embark on this adventure. I suggest that in this respect, you might consider some words of Irenaeus, an eminent church father of the 2nd century. This is what he said: Gloria Dei est vivens homo. The glory of God is a person who is alive. Just what did Irenaeus mean by these words, which have sometimes been misconstrued? Is he talking about mere survival? Now, it is not our object to work you to death in the next 8 months, although sometimes you will probably think so. I do not, therefore, cite Irenaeus to encourage you in the hope that in 8 months you will emerge still alive. No, Irenaeus had something much more profound in mind. I began with a quotation from Jesus himself: I am the way, the truth, and the life. And with John's words, there was a true light which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. How should this fit into everything you will encounter this year at Augustine? Jesus also said in his great discourse, the Sermon on the Mount, quote, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do men light a lamp and put it under a peck measure, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." When you come to the end of your adventure at Augustine College, you should, from all you have learned, reflect the glory of God. You should be alive in such a way that you are a lamp set on a lampstand, giving light to all those who are in the house being today's culture. This surely is what Irenaeus meant. Or to put it in different words, you should have learned a good deal about your current culture, how we got to where we are now, and by comparing, contrasting, and analyzing, be able to articulate the good news of Jesus Christ to your contemporaries. Or, in the Apostle Peter's words, quote, to sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account of the hope that is in you. 1 Peter 3:15. Here I would also draw your attention to some of the words by the individual whom I consider to be the greatest genius in antiquity, the Apostle Paul. Quote, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and delivered himself up for me. Galatians 2:20. Gloria Dei est vivens homo. The glory of God is an individual who is alive in Christ. In conclusion, it is our earnest hope that when you come to the end of 8 months at Augustine, 1, you will have learned a great deal about a number of subjects. 2, you will have begun to think, or to be able to think critically. That is, to assess, to compare, and contrast, and synthesize. 3, you will reflect the glory of God. That is, you will be a lamp that gives light to all who are in the house. You will be able to articulate Jesus Christ to your culture. Welcome to an adventure in learning. Absolutely.